Good evening. Wars are no longer fought only on the battlefield, nor are rivalries managed solely through military deterrence. Economic infrastructure, supply chains, technology, diplomacy, and strategic communication have become key instruments of global competition, blurring the traditional boundaries between war and peace. In Eastern Europe, Ukraine is expanding its long-range campaign by targeting Russia's commercial logistics network, raising questions about whether economic disruption can create strategic leverage where conventional warfare has reached a costly stalemate. Meanwhile, across the Indo-Pacific, Washington and Beijing are seeking to stabilize one of the world's most consequential relationships, even as competition over trade, technology, security, and regional influence intensifies. Do these developments reflect a changing geopolitical landscape where economic pressure and diplomacy increasingly shape the balance of power? And what do they reveal about the future of international conflict? Welcome to In Focus. Ukraine has expanded its long-range drone campaign by targeting Russia's largest online retailer, marking a shift from striking military and energy infrastructure to disrupting the country's commercial logistics network. According to the New York Times, Kyiv says some warehouses supported Russia's war effort by storing dual-use equipment, while Moscow insists they were civilian facilities. The attacks disrupted logistics, affected thousands of businesses, and highlighted Ukraine's broader strategy of increasing the economic costs of the war inside Russia. Analysts remain divided over whether sustained strikes on commercial infrastructure can influence Kremlin decision-making or primarily deepen the conflict's economic and psychological impact. Our first discussion focuses on the latest phase of the Russia-Ukraine war as Kyiv expands the long-range drone campaign beyond military targets to strike Russia's commercial logistics infrastructure. While supporters see it as a strategy to increase the economic costs of war, critics question whether it can influence Moscow's political calculations. To examine the military logic, the strategic objectives, and the potential consequences of this evolving campaign, we're joined by Mr. Bohdan Popov, political advisor from Kyiv. So, good evening to you, Mr. Popov, and welcome to In Focus. Let me start by asking, now, Ukraine has expanded its long-range strikes to commercial logistics facilities. What strategic objective is Kyiv seeking to achieve with this shift?
Good evening. Let's start with there is nothing commercial in Russian Federation. Actually, the Wildberries warehouses and the Wildberries company itself is controlled by Putin's friends, oligarchs, who are earning a lot of money on the war which Russia is fighting against Ukraine. Those warehouses are used to storage Russian drones, components forbidden, more drones, fiber optic cable, which is used for fiber optic FPV drones production, etc., and other equipment which is used by Russians on the front line. And those are very important logistic hubs which really impact on Russian capabilities on the front line. Secondly, I need to mention that Russia started such campaign firstly by destroying Ukrainian logistic hubs of commercial enterprise Nova Poshta all over the country by killing civilians who were working there, etc. And Russia is continuing their deep strike and missile campaign against civilian Ukrainian cities, which are hit by Russian strikes almost every day. All the missiles and all the drones which are produced in Russia are shot immediately onto Ukraine's territory because Russia now has enough resource to produce them due to lack of European and American sanctions. That's why Ukrainian side is doing everything that we can to pressure Russian military-industrial complex, including hitting those warehouses you are talking about. Because either we destroy their defense tech industry and their logistical hubs, or our children in peaceful cities are going to continue dying.
Right. Of course, this is from the Ukrainian perspective and or from the Ukrainian point of view, because it is totally different than the Russian report. Let me here ask you about how significant are attacks on Russia's largest online retailer compared with previous strikes on oil refineries and military infrastructure?
Those are different components of a big campaign against Russian military machine because, it includes a lot of components. It includes the facilities which produce their drones, their missiles, their tanks, everything else. Destroying the refineries is dealing a huge impact on Russia's economy, which is needed to function to fund their war. If we destroy more oil refineries in Russia, Russia will not be able to export any oil products, any gasoline, any diesel, and that's why they will earn less money by exporting crude oil. Also, Ukraine is always attacking Russian seaports, which is also important because reducing the export capability of energy resources such as natural gas, oil, and other products made of those are hitting Russian economy hard because the energy resources and the export is a 20% share of Russian budget as for now. That's why Ukraine is doing everything to stop those processes and including hitting the logistical hubs, etc. But still, all the targets which are hit by Ukrainian drones and missiles are either military use or used for military issues. Because as I told you about those logistical hubs, we had a lot of evidence that Russians are storing their FPV drones, motors for those FPV drones, and fiber optic, which is a very rare resource for drone production right now. And they import it from China using these logistical hubs to transport it directly to their military factories. That's why we need to destroy those facilities as well.
So Ukraine is diversifying its attacks on Ukraine, on Russia from the Ukrainian perspective on all what can be related to the military aspect. But we can also say, sir, that some logistics hubs for food, for an instance, can be supplying Russian soldiers with food. So, but at the same time, they will be supplying civilians. So how do you differentiate?
You don't need to differentiate. If they supply something to military, they are a target. They are already a target if they do anything for the Russian occupation military. That's why Ukraine will hit every target which is connected either to defense industrial complex of Russia or to the Russian military.
Right,
because
but how do you make sure that those targets are used from the Russian side by
we have
the military?
One of the best intelligence services in the whole world. It is announced very well during this wartime. Also, Ukraine always receives satellite imagery from our European and American allies, which helps us to identify which target is used for military and which is not. And there is a long analysis being done before any strike, because unlike Russia, Ukraine is not willing to kill any civilians. Even though Russian people are supporting the war, etc., we are not animals like the Russian side, and we are not willing to kill any children or innocent people.
Definitely. Also, this is the Ukrainian part of the story, since we don't have somebody from the Russian side to confirm. But what you mean here is that you depend on intelligence information and the imagery by the European and the American satellites, or coordination with the Western intelligence information. So let me here ask, is Ukraine attempting to wage a broader campaign of economic attrition rather than pursuing decisive battlefield breakthroughs?
On the front line now, both sides are pretty stuck. So it looks like a stalemate for both sides, and no one is going to move forward because, firstly, Ukraine is not willing to lose a lot of soldiers. Unlike Russia, we want to save more lives of our defenders, and that's why Ukraine is not going to waste battalions and brigades on like useless assaults to regain one village and to lose like thousands of soldiers. Unlike Russia, we are not using those tactics. We don't have too much human resource, and we want to save the lives of our people. And that's why Ukrainian side is not going to make any massive counteroffensives, etc. for now, because we know that Russians have a lot of human resource, a lot of shells, a lot of equipment, etc., and they have enough power to, to defend if we are trying to make some counteroffensive operations. At the same time, Russians have not enough resource to make some breakthroughs on the front line because Ukrainian defenders have very technological equipment now. Ukrainian army is evolving almost every day. We must produce the drones. We produce more than 10 million of FPV and other types of drones per year. That's why for one Russian soldier on the front line, we can use 30 up to 60 of drones just to like destroy one target. That's why we have a good advantage in terms of defensive warfare, and that's why now, as consequences of the war will be made in which side can destroy other side's economy and a critical infrastructure. And that's why we are coming to that stage which happened. Let's look to the historical case that happened in war between Iraq and Iran in the previous century. It was called the War of the Cities. Because the sides could not move on the front line, and they started attacking the cities with missiles and other equipment used for that. And now we are coming to that stage. And for Ukraine, actually, we have an advantage in this case because Russia has a very big territory. And for example, the oil refineries are separated all over the country. And it's harder to cover a big territory with air defense complexes, and for them it's harder to defend their critical facilities. That's why Ukraine has an advantage here. But still, Putin will definitely have an attempt to destroy Ukraine's energy infrastructure before the upcoming winter, because this tactic worked for him in previous years. He's trying to frighten Ukrainian population and Ukrainian leadership with destroying the energy infrastructure, but our government will do everything possible to defend it in this winter to make the situation better than in previous ones.
Right. To what extent can disrupting logistics and supply chains affect Russia's ability to sustain military operations? And at the same time, critics argue that economic pressure is unlikely to change Kremlin decision-making. So how do you respond to that assessment?
We need more influence on Russian economy to pressure Kremlin to negotiate like comfortable terms of ending of this war for Ukraine, because the pressure we have now is pretty much not enough, because European and American sanctions could be bypassed by third countries which are helping Russia to do that. And also Ukrainian deep strike capabilities are growing. They're already very good, and Russia is losing a lot of money because of it. But at the same time, it's not enough, because still Russia can export up to 9 million barrels of crude per day and can refine more than 3.10 million barrels of gasoline per day, and that's why they can survive this pressure. Also, the impact on logistics is very good as well for now, but we need to increase that, because still Russian troops and Russian factories can receive enough gasoline and enough resource to mass produce their drones and their armored vehicles, whatever else. And also their troops on the front line receive enough gasoline and diesel to continue their logistical operations, because they redirect all like the diesel and gasoline from the civilian cities, from the civilian use to the military use. And they have the policy, military first for now, just to save all the needed resource for military needs and take that from civilians. That's why we need more pressure on both sides, on logistics, on economy, and whatever. And we need a lot of support of our allies to like summarize and to push Putin to negotiate normal terms of ending of the war.
So Russia has been adopting by dispersing infrastructure and strengthening air defense. How sustainable is Ukraine's deep strike strategy over the long term?
It's very sustainable, and I add that it will be getting only better and better because we have a competitive market. Unlike Russia, which has centralized military-industrial complex over the state, Ukraine has a lot of private companies that are competing with one each other and producing a lot of different types of deep strike drones. Now we have ongoing competition at missile production on our defense market because already 3 companies are trying to produce R&D for a ballistic missile, which is which we expect to start mass production up to end of this year. At least one of the companies should be contracted by the state. And we have a pretty good ecosystem of defense tech cooperation between private companies and government. That's why our R&D, and we call that technical revolution, is going a little bit faster than it is in Russia. So that's I think that's one of the most valuable our advantages, that we have a free market where defense tech manufacturers can compete. So our drones will get only better because, you know, in private competitions, a company which produces weapons of better quality is always winning and is always making more money. That's why each manufacturer is going to increase the range of those drones, capabilities of carrying a better payload. Maybe they'll invent some new solutions. And as I told you, we already have a competition in missile production. The first cruise missile of Ukraine, a long-range cruise missile of Ukraine, I mean FP5 Flamingo, has shown some good results with destroying key Russian factories of their military-industrial complex, which are Venir Progress, for example. Some components which are used in Russian cruise missiles, in Russian Iskander missiles, in Shahed drones, etc. That's why this campaign is one of the biggest goals of Ukrainian military political leadership, and we are going to develop this industry. And we'll never stop in it because it's our one of the biggest advantages.
Right, Mr. Bogdan Popov, thank you so much for sharing your valuable analysis and thoughtful insights into the evolving dynamics of the Russia-Ukraine war. And as military competition continues in Europe, another major geopolitical contest is unfolding in the Indo-Pacific. Despite profound disagreements over trade, technology, Taiwan, and regional security, Washington and Beijing are once again engaging in high-level diplomacy ahead of a possible summit between Presidents Donald Trump and Xi Jinping. So, can dialogue establish lasting guardrails, or is it merely managing an increasingly competitive relationship?
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear. If you look at that, or we're out.
Despite President Donald Trump's renewed accusations that Beijing interfered in the 2020 U.S. election, analysts say both Washington and Beijing are determined to prevent the dispute from derailing broader bilateral relations. South China Morning Post stated that China has dismissed the claims as baseless, while the Trump administration has stopped short of announcing retaliatory measures. With a trade truce, economic cooperation, and a planned Trump-Xi summit, remaining strategic priorities, both sides appear committed to maintaining stability. Experts suggest the allegations are driven largely by U.S. domestic politics rather than a fundamental shift in China policy, reducing the likelihood of a major diplomatic rupture. To examine the latest developments in U.S.-China relations and the strategic significance of the recent meeting between Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, we are pleased to welcome Mr. Marvin Lee, geopolitical analyst from Hong Kong, to discuss those developments. Mr. Lee, good evening to you, sir, and welcome to In Focus. How significant was the Rubio-Wang meeting in preparing the ground for President Xi Jinping's expected visit to the United States?
Assalamualaikum. Sukuleni istidafati takabala lahu ta'atiku wasalihamalikum. The Rubio and Wang Yi's meeting was very significant to the rest of the world, but we should understand its significance correctly. It was not a breakthrough meeting intended to solve the fundamental disagreement between China and the States. It was a stabilizing meeting designed to ensure that a possible presidential summit could take place in a controlled political environment. And the two foreign policies chiefs reportedly met for around 90 minutes in Manila, in the Philippines, which with much of the discussion focused on preparing for President Xi Jinping's expected visit to Washington in late September. Secretary Rubio said that the objective was to establish the groundwork for a positive visit and identify possible concrete deliverables. However, at this stage, Beijing has not publicly provided an unconditional and confirmation of this visit. And I would like to share my observation here. And there has been a rising tension between China and Japan, and between China and the Philippines, because the Philippines and the Japanese government have been working together in terms of the so-called military collaborations or some similar collaborations together near the Taiwan, near the Chinese sovereignty. And actually, and I have mentioned this before, this topic is actually an extended topic between China and USA. And let me give you a metaphor here. Actually, it is an extra competition outside of the World Cup, just to compete with each other, to test the water, to test the boundary, to test your muscles and test your power before the second stage of talk in late September.
Does this renewed diplomatic engagement signal a genuine effort to stabilize relations, or is it simply a tactical pose amid ongoing strategic competition?
Actually, I can say both here. The two interpretations are not mutually exclusive. China and the States want to prevent their competition from escalating into direct confrontation. At the same time, neither side is abandoning its long-term strategic objectives. China continues to pursue technological self-reliance, which they have been doing very well in recent years. Economic development, national reunification, and a greater role in global governance. And the States continue to strengthen its Indo-Pacific alliance, restrict China's access to certain advanced technologies, and protect its military and economic predominance. However, strategic competition does not eliminate the need for collaboration or cooperation. In fact, it makes communication more necessary. So that's why these recent meeting between Rubio and Wang Yi is very significant and build a foundational groundwork for the possible state visit in late September.
Now, how might the proposed Section 301 tariffs affect the atmosphere ahead of the planned summit?
First of all, from the Chinese perspective, there are three concerns here. First, Beijing may regard the tariff as an example of the United States using domestic law to exercise economic pressure beyond its national borders. And second, the tariff could weaken trust before the summit. Diplomacy becomes much more difficult when one side is offering dialogue while simultaneously preparing new economic measures or pressures against other countries. Third, China may respond. It could introduce countermeasures, increase regulatory pressures on American companies, or tighten controls over strategically important materials like rare earth and supply chains. And the economic relationship remains too important to treat tariffs as cost-free here. According to the U.S. Trade Representative, the total U.S. good trade with China was approximately around 414.7 billion USD in 2025, and the U.S. good deficit with China fell to around 200 billion USD, but the scale of bilateral trade remains enormous here. So that's why neither side does not want to see an escalation here, does not want to see any possible military confrontation here. Both sides needs both market to do business, especially President Donald Trump, and he has a business mindset, he has an entrepreneurial mindset, rather than an ideologically,
yes.
Yes, a confrontational approach.
So, can Washington and Beijing realistically separate the economic disputes from broader security disagreements over Taiwan and the South China Sea, for an instant?
Honestly, from my own humble perspective, I do not think so here, because there's no such separate issues between USA and China. And let me give you another metaphor here. They are having a MMA fight. They are fighting with each other. They are competing with each other. So they are going to have a talk together and may make some concessions while the other side will gain as well. So it is like a trade between both sides. So from the perspective of President Donald Trump, if the deal is enormous, if the business deal is enormous, very favorable to the American people, I don't think that President Donald Trump would stupidly launch a stupid military campaign regarding Taiwan. And this is my fault here, because both sides is both market the industrial chain here, even though the American and the Western allies have been talking about China plus one policy, like to have a industrial diversification, and I can't see there is any successful path here.
Right. The term managed competition is increasingly used to describe the relationship. What does that concept mean in practical terms?
Actually, it has 5 elements or categories here. First, both sides continue competing in technology, trade, military capability, global influence, international institutions, AI, space race. And second, neither side expects the other to fundamentally change its political system. And third, both countries maintain regular senior level dialogue even during the period of tensions. And fourth, they establish guardrails around especially dangerous areas, especially Taiwan issue, naval encounters, cyber operations, nuclear policy, and military exercise. And fifth, which is the last point here, they preserve limited cooperation where interests overlap, like climate change, financial stability, some global health, and the protection of international shipping here, like the crisis of Strait of Hormuz, the recent crisis in near the Red Sea as well. So actually, both sides would like to work together to de-escalate the tension and even to make a stability here. But before that, both China and the United States of America would like to maximize their national interest, especially China. And because we have a right to defend ourselves, we have the right to have to promote freedom of trade or freedom of trade to the rest of the world without any tariff.
Now, how important are military communication channels and diplomatic guardrails in preventing unintended escalation between the two powers?
This is absolutely essential here. The greater danger in US-China relations may not be a deliberately planned war. It may be an unfortunate accident, misunderstanding or incident that political leaders that find difficult to control or find it difficult to de-escalate because they need to they need to report it to their own people or to their own vast interests or their stakeholders. American and Chinese battleships and aircraft frequently operate in relatively close in the Western Pacific region. Coalition, aggressive interception, or misinterpreted military exercise could rapidly become a national political crisis, like what we encountered in 2016, right after the so-called arbitration launched by the Western world, launched by some institutions. And the U.S. Department of Defense previously documented more than 180 risky intercepts of American aircraft in the region between 2021 to 2023. And regardless of how Beijing and Washington interpret individual encounters, that number demonstrates the operation risk created when two major militaries interact regularly. So that's why we need some military channels or hotline channels just to de-escalate the tensions here.
To what extent do domestic political pressures in both countries limit the prospects for meaningful agreements during Xi's expected visit?
Okay. So in China, President Xi Jinping also faced some very important domestic constraints here. The Chinese government must defend the national sovereignty because of our painful lesson, the so-called the century of humiliation since 1842 until 1997, because the loss of Western powers invade our land and soil and water. That's why we have the right to defend our national sovereignty with our rapid military development. So our PLA, our People's Liberation Army, is to defend our homeland rather than make any aggressive invasion, unlike the States. And this is the first point. And the second, in the United States, China policy has become one of the very few areas of broad like bilateral agreements. Both Republicans and Democrats increasingly view China as a strategic competitor. Like in a layman term, they view us as a threat. Why? Because their ancestor used to build a very, very strong navy to invade the rest of the world. I mean, they means the Western powers, the Western empires, like the British, German, French, and then we have been building our own military, like stronger than ever, and they're afraid because they are using the same logic to perceive us as the next threat. And of course, we are not the threat. We are here to defend our trade rules and our homeland. In order to have a talk here, actually, there is a Chinese wisdom. If you want to have a peaceful talk, first you need to have muscles to defend yourself in order to have a agreement or discussion peacefully.
Now, looking ahead, do you expect the US-China relationship to move towards greater strategic stability, or will competition continue to intensify despite this ongoing dialogue?
So if I expect the US-China relationship to move with an optimistic approach, I will be very naive, honestly, to be honest, because I can see that the relationship between China and the United States is actually a Cold War 2.0 here. China would like to challenge the American supremacy with all aspects, from the soft power to hard power to the sharp power, everywhere. And the United States of America has never seen a competitor that can comprehensively compete all sectors, all different sectors, from movies to space to AI, in the dialogue of the international institutions. Even the former Soviet Union could not do so, and we are the first, according to the 2015.
So briefly, because I'm running out of time, do you think relations would get better after those meetings? Do you think things would be settled? Very briefly.
I hope they will get better, but honestly, I can see there is a confrontation here.
Right. Thank you so much, Mr. Marvin Lee, and for definitely your valuable insights and for helping us better understand the evolving dynamics shaping the US-China relations and the broader international order. Now, I guess that was In Focus. Many thanks for watching, and definitely stay tuned for the top stories coming right after on Qnews.